everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS fades for week 1, the main slate, kicking off the season for real here tomorrow. Going to talk about 5 of the players that I think are being a little bit overhyped this week, and as such, that I will be avoiding in my player pool, whether it's a bad matchup, a game script that isn't conducive to going out there and having a ceiling performance. In either circumstance, these won't be players that I'm getting to in bunches, and if anything, at the very most, might be matching the field on. So there's players around them that I expect to outperform them. We'll talk about some of the potential pivots that you could get to in each situation. And without further ado, a lot to talk about here. Let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. All right, we've got our projections up, and the first fade we're going to touch on, unfortunately, is Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. You know I'm a big Pittsburgh fan, so it's going to pain me to say this, but with the matchup against a superior team in the Bengals, it's going to be a fade for me, right? He's somebody who depends on usage, and if you're playing from behind, which I expect Pittsburgh to be playing from behind for at least most of the game, you're not going to see that many targets, at least rushing targets for Najee Harris. He might have most of his production come through the air, and while it's not impossible for him to get 7 or 8 targets out of the backfield, that would be considered an outlier performance. So for Najee to get to that ceiling, we're really looking for a 1 out of maybe 7 to 8 type of performance that he might have happen once or twice a year. I mean, just coming to mind, he had an 8-catch game last year, had a 10-target game towards the end of the year as well. If that ends up happening, right, that might end up sustaining his price tag. That might end up getting him to that 25 point performance, but I'm not going to count on that happening a good quarter, a third of the time. Like, you're going to have to allocate to him ownership-wise to get leverage because he's 11% owned, right? And at the running back position, that is, I don't want to say super chalky because there's certainly guys a lot higher owned. One of them that we'll talk about a little bit later, but also Jonathan Taylor, who's nearly 20%. But 11.1% Najee Harris is far from a pivot in the 6K range. So I'm looking for players that are in better game environments, whether it's playing from ahead, a closer game script, or just in general, maybe a workload that doesn't depend as nearly as much as catching the ball through the air as somebody like Najee Harris might have to in this situation. So I worry about all of that. The ownership is there as well, so he's not going to find his way into my player pool. Next up, we've got Kyle Pitts at $5,700. Another player I'd say that really is in a non-functional offense. I mean, Marcus Mariota is far from what you want at the starting QB position. You're also dealing with a lot of moving parts, new wide receivers, rookies being added to the mix, a lot of O-linemen that have been shuffled around the board over the last few years. And overall, I expect them to be a little bit leaky early, extremely rusty, especially with a new quarterback at the helm. So for guys like Kyle Pitts, that long-term, at least by the middle to end of the season, I expect to be one of the best fantasy tight ends that we can get to. I'm going to be a little bit more hesitant at the beginning of the year, particularly when he's coming in at 9.5% owned. Now, you have to realize here that he's also coming in as a relatively cheap tight end, right? He's $5,700, and almost all of them in that range are like at most 5-6% owned, right? You can only play one tight end in your lineup, or you can play him at flex if you want to, but people, usually opt to take a running back or a wide receiver as a result. So 9% here is perhaps a little bit more important than most positions, right? Like a quarterback that's 9%, just to give you a little bit of a comparison, would be a Patty Mahomes. It's pretty much right in line with that sort of play. So he's definitely getting some attention. Like I mentioned, doesn't have the best quarterback play in terms of his production, and I expect the whole offense to be a little bit rusty early in the year. And much like Najee Harris, if he was low owned, if you were looking at like 3.5% ownership on either of these plays, I'd be getting to them this week. But when they get close to 9 or 11%, like you have with a Najee Harris there, you're looking at least investing 25% of your lineups into these plays, and their hit rates, their optimal lineup percentage rates are well below that, making them just players that I'm not willing to get to. Speaking of that, Tyreek Hill, a little bit of a different situation. Now, the Dolphins are favored. He's a wide receiver, and I'd argue with Kyle Pitts, the game script isn't as important there. It's a lot more about the quarterback play, really more than it is the game script that he's in. But Tyreek Hill, it's all about the matchup. He's going against the New England Patriots. So it's not a specific player that you have to worry about with the Patriots. It's Bill Belichick's scheme. Now, I've said this multiple times this week. You're going to hear this every single week, actually, because it's something that I've noticed I've played as a massive edge in DFS over the years. When you play against Bill Belichick, he's going to take your best option and completely remove them. Now, by completely remove, it probably means like 5-6 catches for Tyreek at the very best, something like 70 to 80 yards, and probably not scoring a touchdown. Now, if you were to go out there, get you 6 catches for 80 yards, that's 14 points. It's not the end of the world, but we're talking about it in a large field GPP. He's going to be 12.4% owned. And if you're playing in a large field GPP, we're not playing for 10th place or the top 10th percentile, right? We're looking to finish in that actual top 10, win in some cases what can be life-changing money. And Tyreek Hill, I'm not sure he has that upside. He's going against that Bill Belichick-led defense who's going to try everything he can to shut down Tyreek and force Tua, who's again dealing with a lot of moving parts, kind of similar to a Marcus Mariota. I kind of expect him to struggle in a similar fashion to Mariota, perhaps a little bit less because there's not quite as many moving parts in Miami as what you have over there in Atlanta. But still, again, new running backs, right? New wide receiver targets to worry about there. There's going to be at least a little bit of rust to shake off there. And Tyreek Hill against a mastermind on defense might be under a little bit of trouble. So I project him for 16 points. That's far from a bad performance, right? I mean, that's still pretty decent. But at 12.4% owned, like a lot of the other players here, like Najee, Kyle Pitts, I kind of worry about their ability to get to a ceiling given, again, the matchup here than the situations that the top two players were in. Saquon Barkley is in a completely different situation. This is one of the more clear fades that I think you can get to. In fact, his ownership just has to come down. Like, people have got to realize that this is a trap spot waiting to happen. He's in a negative game script, right? The Giants are about 5.5-point underdogs against the Tennessee Titans at last time that I checked. He's $6,100, so he's cheap, but he's not like a value running back. There's plenty of guys around him that you could pivot to, and I project him for 15 points, which is doable, but 17.8% ownership, way, way higher than I'm willing to take. In fact, he's the second highest owned player on the slate at the position. Now, 17.8% at that price tag would make sense if they're a favorite, right? Like if you had them on a team that had a great O-line, we're expecting them to score 25 to 30 implied points. They're 3 to 5 point favorites, that sort of thing. We'd love Saquon Barkley. We'd be playing him in half of our lineups, right? He'd probably be even higher owned than 18%. But we're dealing with him as an underdog, somebody who we don't know if he's going to get all that many looks out of the backfield. In fact, he hasn't over the last few years when he's been healthy, has been targeted less than the average player out there at the running back, and is dealing with, again, a tough defense with Tennessee. That's also favored, right? And it's one of the lower totals on the entire slate. I don't understand why he's getting all of this attention, and frankly, it makes him a really easy fade. I'm going to go ahead and lump in Wan'Dale Robinson here, who's $3,000, has Daniel Jones thrown to him, so kind of similar to Marcus Mariota. You know, I really, really don't like taking these wide receivers that are playing with a sorry quarterback because they, first off, have a much lower implied touchdown equity, but also much more inconsistent results because of their quarterback play. It's extremely inconsistent to start with, and that is what drives a wide receiver's production. So I know he's $3,000. He's going to be 9.4% owned, and actually, before I ran my last set of ownership, it was closer to 14%, so it's come down a little bit, but still way up there. I project him for 6.7 points, right, which is decent. There are guys around him in the pricing, so if you're on my Patreon page, you'll have access to all of this, that are projecting for more points and like 6-7 times less ownership. I'm just going to pivot to those players, right? Like, he's going to get snaps, Wan'Dale Robinson, but you still have Kadarius Toney out there. You have Bellinger out there. Sterling Shepard is going to be back. He's at best going to be the wide receiver 3, if not the pass catcher number 4 for that team. Don't expect him to absolutely go off there. Now, can he go off? Yes, I think if he were a sneaky play this week, I would be all over Wan'Dale Robinson because he's going to see snaps. I know that they're in a losing game script, so they're probably going to throw a lot during the game. But is he worth being 10% owned? Somebody that you're going to have to take in 25 to 30% of lineups to get leverage to? Heck no, right? So he's going to be the last player that we're fading there. And like I said, plenty of players at $3,000 that you can get to. Just to give you an idea, Romeo Doubs is down there. He plays for the Packers. I think that he'd be a great pivot that you can get to at $3,000. But also a lot of guys right around like $3,400, $3,500 that project significantly higher than the 6.7 point projection we have for Wan'Dale Robinson. So I'll get to any of those guys as a little bit of a pivot there, and I think you're going to be in good shape. All right, fellas, that's all I've got for this week's fades. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button, but also go ahead and let me know one player you are for sure fading this week. Just make sure they're relatively high owned. You don't got to give me your projected percentage, right? But go ahead and let me know who you won't be playing this week. And make sure to keep an eye out for all of the content throughout the season. Tomorrow, I'll be doing a live stream on my Discord server for all of my Patreon members. We'll be going through the injury reports in the morning. I'll be making all of my lineups, talking through all of the things that I'm making sure to include, whether it's roles in my opto, players that I'm including, excluding, all of that sort of fun stuff. So make sure you are a part of my Patreon. Make sure you can catch that piece of content. I'll be doing that every Sunday. The stream that I did this Friday will also be a regular thing the rest of the season. So weeks 2 through 17, you'll see that as well. That'll be every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be going live, going through every single game, injury report, players that I have an eye on, all that sort of fun stuff. And if you haven't seen the video for this week, I'd highly recommend you check that out too. It's on my page, YouTube there, and it's about an hour and a half, just a lot of information to take in, whether it's from the injury side, stack side, all that sort of fun stuff. And by the end of that video, you should feel pretty prepared for this week. So until then, guys, I'm really excited for this slate tomorrow. Again, 13 games, should be absolute fireworks out there. Best of luck with all of your lineups, any bets that you decide to go with here for opening day, I should say. And let's get this cash.